All right, we're looking at a fairly conventional flow screen, part of a health survey, health questionnaire. And let's suppose that I fill out some fields here, and then I click next, and then I get to the next screen, and I just abandon the flow. I just abandon it and I go away. But then I come back and I want to resume it. Now, if I have hit the pause button, I can go and resume it, no problem. But what if I didn't hit the pause button? What if, what if I'm a guest user? Then I don't have access to the paused flows component. Well, suppose that I'd been given a resume code. So I could type that resume code in here and resume my flow. So let's go and see how that would work. Turns out that when I got done with that first screen, my answers were stored. They were stored in a record called a flow session record. This is just a custom object that I happen to call flow session. And you can see that my answers are in here. The data is all in here. It's being stored in this record, and there's a resume code here. So if we let's start that from scratch. And let's run this. And this time let's pay attention to this resume code. Okay, so the resume code is 36543. And I am going to reveal that I am suffering from the yips, and I have a tangy foot sensation, and then I'm gonna quit, and later I'm gonna come back to this flow and enter that value, and there is the information. So how is that going on? How do we enable guest users to get a code like this and come back? Well, we're using a couple of different pieces of technology behind the scenes. So here's the screen, and you can see that in the screen, the default values are set when the screen is created from something called Cur Health Survey Session Data. So we're putting, and you can see it's got a field for full name. It's basically this variable has a field for each of my screen fields. So if I have that information stored and I get it into this health survey session data object, then I can make sure that when this screen renders, that previous information is shown here. And if we go back here, you can see that all of that information is here in a string. So what we're doing in the flow is we're taking this information stored in a string, which is just a convenient way to store some information, throw it into a string in a record. And then what we're doing here is we're grabbing that string and we're sending it to an action to be deserialized into this health survey session data. And then once we have that string converted to this object, then we can take individual pieces and use them to populate this. And then afterwards, after we click the next button, we're going to go in the other direction. We're going to take those individual screen component values, which are right here, and we're going to update this health survey session data object with them. Then we're going to serialize it. So we're going to take that health survey session data object, we're going to convert it to a string, and then we're going to use that string to update the flow session. So we're basically using an object to interact with the screens, and we're using a string to store the information. And this is a very common pattern in coding, because it's just a lot easier to store things as strings but when you're working with them, you want to be able to work with their individual parts, and it's a lot easier to work with individual parts if you've got an object. Okay, so where is this health service data thing coming from? Well, it's an Apex class. What we've done is we've defined an Apex class, and we've given it, so far it's got 6 different fields that correspond to 6 different pieces of information that are being used in the flow. And we're taking advantage of the fact that flow, if you take an Apex class and you mark some of its variables as aura enabled, then you can use this inside the flow. And so if we go and we look, you can see that we've created an Apex defined variable here, and that's what this is. And I could create another one and go down here and select Apex defined, and it pops that Apex class. It's popping up here because of these aura enabled annotations. If you stick one in there, flow goes, oh hey, I might be able to do something with that. So that's the essential flow of this thing. First we're looking to see if there's any session data stored as a string from a previous session. If there is, we deserialize it into one of these rich objects. Then we use the properties of that object to populate the screen. The user updates the screen, and then we update our sort of data model, our object, serialize it back to a string, and store it in a record. Now, the deserialize and serialize, these are flow actions that I created for this. Let's go take a look at that. They're very simple. All that's happening here is we're passing in the health survey session data. So this has to be created specifically for my own Apex class. This is essentially the Apex class's serializer. And up here, this is really the line that matters. I'm taking that health survey session data and I'm turning it into a string. And then the deserialized one is very similar, it just goes the other direction. It takes a string as an input, it calls the Apex deserialize method, and it returns a health survey session data object. So you might be thinking, this is an awful lot of overhead and infrastructure just to enable data to be paused and resumed from the screen. And there's some truth to that, but sometimes you have a business requirement like that. And the good news is that it's surprisingly easy to extend once we have this basic framework. Let's suppose that we want to add a second screen. So we've got a screen here, and we want to add a checkbox, and we want to say, we'll call this do you see spots? And so now we've got this checkbox. We want to make sure that this too can be captured and stored and reused. So what do we have to add to this? Well, we have to basically copy down this sync, and serialize, the update, and both the assignment and the update record. So I have to basically add this block of 4 elements for my screen here. And I haven't done this with a loop. It might be possible to do with a loop. That would be an interesting exploration. I would have to change this, because here what I would care about would be, I would be looking to store in a new property. So I have to add that new property. This new property is going to be basically the see spots property. So I can go here to my record. The bad news is I have to make a change in Apex every time I want to add a field or change a field in my flow, so that these Apex actions can continue to do their serialization and their deserialization. The good news is it's not very hard. I just go here and I say, let's let's see, do you know, symptom see spots, and if I save this and deploy it, then this flow, when reloaded, will show in its apex defined variable there will be a new entry here for seeing spots, and I will be able to grab that data from the serialized string that it's stored in and load the proper value in here. So serialization and deserialization can be useful in a lot of use cases. This is a surprisingly efficient way to take a lot of questions, a lot of screen fields, and store them when you don't immediately need to do something with them and you just want to store them, and know that you can use them later. So a lot of some new possibilities here, and good luck. Hopefully this was useful and gave you some new insights in how you can do advanced pause and resume and make use of Apex defined data types. Take care.